Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I am so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Today's episode is inspired by a real question many families face. What happens when a parent contemplates buying a house for their college-bound son or daughter and turning the extra rooms into rentals for the child's friends? Our scenario in Virginia, a mom considers buying a house near a university and renting the rooms to her son's friends, or at least other students. I'll break down the motivations, potential financials, legal considerations, and a balanced approach so that you can decide what might work in your own family. Quick disclaimer, I'm not giving legal advice or financial advice here. I'm just exploring ideas and giving you considerations for awkward conversations, like I always do. Always consult a local real estate attorney or CPA before making big decisions for yourself. And especially make sure you are looking where the rental is going to be, not in your local area. Okay, so let's paint the scenario here. A parent in Virginia considering buying a house near a Virginia university for her college age son. The plan includes renting the extra bedrooms to his friends or his colleagues, his fellow students, ideally at market rent or a fair portion of it. Why would she consider this? Potential advantages include convenience and safety for her son, especially during finals or breaks. And how about a hedge against rising student housing costs, potentially stabilizing overall living expenses? What happens if you can't find housing at the university at all? And potential income from the rental units that could offset mortgage costs. But this also comes with some concerns: landlord-tenant responsibilities, safety, and property upkeep. You also have to build relationships with a group of young adults who may have varying lifestyles and rent paying reliability, and let's face it, maturity levels. There may also be concerns with zoning, homeowners association rules, and local occupancy limits. Likely every student might be driving some kind of vehicle, so parking may also be a issue. And what about all these first time renters in their own place for the first time? Quick thought, in Virginia, local ordinances and state laws govern rentals, including security deposits, eviction procedures, and fair housing rules. We'll walk through some of these in a moment, but most of the time, wherever your local state housing, province, whatever you're looking for, wherever that university is, and I know many of you are listening in Canada, this still applies. You still have to go through state and local, sorry, provincial and local occupancy consideration for tenancy. Even, yeah, they're students, but it doesn't matter. It still applies for tenants. But let's talk about the basics of the rental itself, the house itself, financial basics, and the math. So a simple financial framework of the investment of the house. So you've got mortgage and carrying costs, principals, interest, taxes, and insurance, plus, of course, maintenance. And you still have to screen these applicants, even if they're your son's friends, you still have to screen them. Rental income, and this will estimate market rents per room. Now, in this example, Virginia colleges in the area will have competitive rates, but wherever you are, if you're considering doing this, make sure you are researching the comparable room rentals. And it depends on the proximity to the university, of course. It depends on the amenities around it. If there's any kind of public transit you want to include on wherever this rental is in proximity to the university. Break-even analysis. If you need so many dollars a month to cover the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance and expenses, how many rooms at whatever rent do you need to cover it? But you also have to have contingencies, including vacancies, management time, property repairs, potential HOA dues if applicable. Are you hiring a property manager? Because they're not going to work for free. What about the appliances? Also, if we're renting to students, what about the vacancies during summer? Are they going to just up and leave at the end of the year and be gone for 2 or 3 months in the middle of summer? They might. You got to look at that. Okay, so let's do a quick example here. If there's a house near a Virginia University, let's say it costs $450,000. Let's just say down payment is 20%, 90,000 is down payment, which let's talk about that. Who has 90,000 in their cash account right now just to put on a down payment? So As a parent, you might have to leverage something else to get the down payment, or you might have to get creative just to buy this place. But at a 30-year fixed rate, 6.5%, just for this illustration, property insurance, taxes, and interest might be somewhere around 3 grand, let's just say. Now, of course, that depends on taxes and insurance. It depends on your mortgage rate. It depends on a lot of things. And it also depends, the expenses are going to depend on other things as well, like I said, repairs and management. But if you rent 3 bedrooms at $900 each, that's $2,700 monthly, close to the mortgage without the utilities. Aha, you also have to have utilities. If utilities or internet are included, that reduces the margin but improves the tenant appeal. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to say this when we're talking about utilities. We're talking about college students here. What are the chances college age son isn't going to find a girlfriend, or the friends aren't going to find a girlfriend? So just keep that in mind when we're talking about occupancy, utilities, wear on the house. We're just talking about rent in general, that you want to be sure that it may not just be the one person. It is very likely going to be them and their friends. Okay, also, you might consider a reserve fund for vacancies and repairs. You could also write into the lease that if they're going to rent for a year, that they have to pay for the whole year if they're going to vacate at the end of summer, or maybe there's a contingency. A maintenance reserve is not a bad idea, 3 to 6 months cushion. But again, you have to have sort of a burp of money to create that reserve. And if you have a property manager, there is a good chance they're going to want that type of reserve account ready to go. So they don't have to call you every 5 minutes. So make sure that you've got some kind of plan for maintenance. But you always want to run your own numbers with whatever rate quotes there are, local rents, and make sure you're really looking at everything, including things like lawn maintenance, snow removal. There's a lot, gutters, cleaning the gutters, doing annual maintenance. There's a lot of things that you've got to consider because, again, whether you want to admit it or not, if you buy this home for whoever, this is still a rental. This is still a business. And you still have to run the numbers. You have to be smart about this. Okay, legal and rental structure considerations. Key pieces to investigate in Virginia, but not limited to Virginia. Wherever your local thing is, wherever your local rental is, landlord and tenant laws. You want to make sure that you are up on the latest tenancy laws. Now, you can start with some of the location specific podcasts that I am working my way through. I've done a whole bunch in 2025. I'm going to be through US and Canada and into Australia and parts of Europe by the end of 2026. So if you've got questions on where to start, I have done one episode that are all nearly an hour long, pretty darn close, on every location by the end of 2026 that you could potentially have a rental in North America or Australia. So make sure that you are up on how do you even get started on this. But you want to make sure you know security deposits, notice requirements, eviction timelines, habitability standards, rent increase notices, things like that. And in this example, make sure you not only know wherever the university rental is going to be, but check the laws in the municipality, because sometimes, like in Maryland, you have as a landlord. You have to be licensed as a landlord. Sometimes the units have to be declared as a rental. Sometimes HOA actually makes you declare whoever your tenants are going to be. They get to approve your tenants. So if you happen to buy a university home in an HOA and they have to vet and they don't want you to have student housing, maybe you just bought a house in the middle of an HOA that now you can't rent out. So make sure you do your due diligence. Zoning and occupancy is included in that. Make sure it is zoned for multi-unit rental and occupancy limits per unit. Insurance is also in play here. This is a huge one, especially if you talk to your insurance agent and say, hey, I want to rent out this house to a bunch of students room by room. There may be different insurance policies for that location, and especially what you're doing. Especially if mom or dad are not local to the area. They may require you to have a property manager, which may not be a bad idea. Just depends on your situation. One more time, HOA or condo rules, if applicable, confirm rentals are allowed and whether there are caps for specific rules or renting rooms or parking spaces. That's the other issue in HOAs. Okay, let's talk about this house, this rental structure of this house that this person wants to buy for their college age son or daughter. Single family home with separate bedrooms and a shared common area, which is called a house share setup. Now, separate suites if the home has multiple units. This has actually gotten very popular in Victoria, BC, where you have an apartment building with all of these former apartments or big flats. Every floor was a big flat. And what developers have done is they've come in and they've actually made lockout suites off of a gigantic common area room that's a big living room, shared kitchen, and maybe some laundry, but everybody has their own bedroom and bathroom with a deadbolt. And there's actually even some storage. I know of some of this. So this has become very popular when you're in a house share situation. It's not actually a house share. You're actually renting out pieces of a rental situation. I don't even know what you call them, separate suites, I guess. But if you're going to do that kind of thing, make sure that you've done your homework on is that kind of items allowed. There's a lot of folks who are house hacking here, and it may or may not be allowed. It may or may not be permitted. So before you buy this structure, whatever you're going to rent for your buy for your son or daughter, make sure that you are checking the permits. I always check the permits on making sure what's legal, what's not. Remember, very likely if it's not permitted, it either can't be appraised, it won't be included in the value of the home, or it may have to have additional insurance. I don't know. So it just depends on the situation. But make sure whatever type of structure you're thinking of looking at for this investment house, instead of a student dorm or an apartment on campus, make sure you are paying attention on what is permitted and what is not. The other thing that you could do is you could just do a sublease. It's a sublease through formal agreement with the son as the primary leasee or guarantor arrangement. Okay, fine. That's logistics. Now let's talk about my favorite thing, tenant screening. Tenant screening and leases. Now you've got to, if it didn't happen, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. It's pretty simple. So, but you've got to use a formal residential lease wherever you are, in this case in Virginia. Clear terms on rent, due dates, late fees, responsibilities, and house rules. There are also roommate addendums specifically for unrelated people renting out rooms. You might consider adding in documentation in your lease specifically for roommates. And this is what I include in my standard lease agreement. My standard addendum, it says this. I've actually cut and pasted it, and I've got some other resources for you. If you are in a roommate situation, we only accept one payment for security deposit. Only one check will be written to return the security deposit. Any shifts in roommates will include roommates providing deposits amongst other roommates. The landlord will not remit the deposit back mid-tenancy nor for an individual. We will only accept one payment for rent. Please consolidate your rent into one deposit, and one person will pay the rent payment as a whole. Payments and mischief against roommates is not an individual item for the landlord. We're renting to your group as a whole. Now, remember, I rent apartments and basically townhomes. So this is the situation here, is if people are unrelated and they come in, this is the spiel that's automatically in the lease addendum. Now, renting out to students is a little bit different, but they're still roommates. So here we go. I'm going to keep going here. Okay, renting to your group as a whole, we expect to be paid in one payment, and any non-payment group. We do not evict individuals, enforce the lease items on individuals, nor remit deposit portions to individuals. Now, I've put a generic roommate agreement for Virginia in the show notes today, and you can find a similar one for your area. Even if you're in Canada, there are similar roommate agreements, but you want to also check your state, province, or territory pre-made forms if they offer them, because some locations have great forms for roommates, impressive forms for roommates, including checklists and who's doing dishes and not blocking the laundry. Like, there's a lot of mixed information there about roommates. It can get really logistically hairy. And so check your local area, wherever you're buying this rental for your son or daughter, make sure you're checking because they may have some pre-made forms or some guidance in the local tenancy laws about roommates. Now, if you can get them, I always consider local co-signers. Now, why is this important? Remember, if we're talking about college age students here, chances that they are moving right from mom or dad's house is high. They likely have no rental history at all. They don't know how a tenant is supposed to behave. So I'm trying to teach them that you have to behave, you have to adhere to the rules. This is an adult contract now. So there's a lot of moving parts in this tenancy screening. So if you can get local co-signers local to that area, that's ideal. May not be possible, so just take that with a grain of salt. Now, since the roommates are students or peers, expectations of cleanliness, noise, and shared responsibilities, major problems in shared housing typically happen in the common areas. Like I said, not doing dishes, blocking the laundry, being noisy at all hours of the day and night, things like that. So make sure that you've got it in writing what's expected and expect problems to happen, unfortunately. Now, my friend's son is likely also a first-time renter and very likely may not take this rental seriously. Same with his friends. They may still be a bit immature, even though they're going to college. They may just say, oh, this is my friend's house, my friend's parents' house. They may or may not be paying the rent, but they still have no experience as a tenant. So there will be problems with mischief, cleanliness, and other real world problems. And that doesn't matter if they're students or not. That's just new tenant problems. Now, things you want to make sure that you include in your lease, including things like don't tamper with the safety items like smoke detectors, handrails, carbon monoxide detectors, egress routes, signage. Make sure you've got clear rules about roommates, who is allowed as an occupant. Like I said, try not to allow girlfriends, boyfriends to move in. So you can have rules on how many nights people can stay over. I mean, this is a real thing. You don't want people moving in per se, but also things like parking, visitor policies, noise is another one again. But at this point, I can say, look, if you are especially out of state considering buying a home for your son or daughter to share with other roommates, you might consider getting some professional guidance at this point, whether you're talking to a realtor, a real estate attorney, a local CPA to understand the tax implications. Because if you're buying in a different state and you're making money from this house, you may have to file state taxes and remit items even to your city or county, your municipality. You don't know the local tax implications. You might also talk with a property manager. Make sure you're doing your homework on this. The deductions on this house is going to impact you, including mortgage, interest, depreciation, allowable rental expenses. Yes, I realize this is an investment that you're trying to hedge for whatever reason for your university student, but you got to also take it as this is an investment here. Okay, now let's talk about dynamics here, practical management of the dynamics. Managing relationships is crucial when you're renting to a family friend or family member's peer in the home. Now, as a rule, I don't rent to friends or family. However, I always give them the choice. I say, if you want to rent from me, you absolutely can, but you get no preferential treatment at all. You are entering my business. And then they make the choice. So take that with a grain of salt here. You're renting not only to a family member, it's a family member's friend. So this can be a little tricky here. But you want to set clear boundaries for this rental. Expectations about noise, shared spaces, guest policies. I think we've beaten that dead horse a bit. But also, one other thing we haven't mentioned is what about maintenance requests, emergencies, and rent collection? Will there be a property manager, or is the son or parent expected to handle it? If you're trying to self-manage this, is that realistic? Things can and will break. Will the son be expected to coordinate the repairman and access to the house or the rooms? Rent can be put right in the lease to either pay electronically or walk the deposit into a bank branch. And truthfully, for me, I have never collected rent and I don't intend to. I give my tenants a clear way to pay their rent, Typically, there's an electronic method, there's an automatic method, and then there's a personal, physical way they can walk into a bank branch or credit union branch and pay their rent. Now, if you're consolidating in a roommate situation, it's a little bit different. If this is your only rental and you're just expecting, 3 or 4 rent payments, it's a little different. But if you've got lots and lots of units and you're in a roommate situation like this, then you likely will have a different strategy to consolidate, and you get one of the students to be the champion. Everybody pays them and then they will remit to you. And that's how we do it, is that I don't accept individual room payments, but I also don't typically rent by the room at all. Okay, now let's talk about managing first-time renters in general. We have requirements and qualifications, and it has worked quite well for us over the many decades of being landlords. But does it take some faith on our part? Yes, it does. But where we are, we require a local co-signer to be on the rental lease. They have to get fully qualified as an applicant, including credit and background check and everything. Like I said, they go on the lease as a co-signer, not an occupant. And typically for 6 months, we do monthly walkthrough inspections of the rental. And this usually happens the first week of the month, takes 5 minutes or less. What we're doing is making sure there's no additional beings living in the unit, no damage. We check their standards of cleanliness because most of the time, this is the first time they have not been under mom and dad's roof. So typically clothes are on the floor, dishes are not done. But if it gets way out of hand, we have to say, hey, housekeeping standards have to be met. You have to do this. Or if we can't inspect because it's just too dirty, then that's the other issue too. So it's also making sure that there's no damage. We also get to ask them if there's anything that needs addressing. The goal of this exercise is to be able to give them a positive rental reference at the end of their first lease. And let's face it, I'm also trying to teach them what a good tenant and what a good landlord looks like. What is it that you should expect from your landlord, and how should they behave as a tenant? I'm an overachiever. What can I say? So if they do well over the first 6 or 12 months, then the monthly inspections can stop. The co-signer can come off typically after 1 year once they've basically earned the reference. Now, this is always a leap of faith for us. It doesn't always work out. We do have to give warning letters. We do have to email and mail letters out and say, look, smarten up. This is not working. This is what you have to do. And either they don't know or they're still growing up. We are finding that sometimes mom and dad doesn't want to be the bad guy, and that's okay. I can play the landlady. I'm okay with that. Okay, contingencies for changes. What if the son graduates or moves out? Is there any indication of a long-term plan for this, or is this just a knee-jerk move just to get them into housing for next semester? So you want to be looking long-term. What is the plan for continuing the rental or selling the home? Is there a long-term plan at all? Just a question. Okay, communicating. When you're communicating with these roommates, put it in writing, a simple roommate agreement like the one I have in the show notes, in addition to the lease that outlines shared responsibilities, chores, guest limits. We've talked about that, and regular check-ins. Quarterly or mid-semester conversations can prevent conflicts from brewing, and likely in close quarters like that, the conversation should likely be even more frequent than that, probably monthly. Okay, let's talk about some quick expert tips and best practices. I've added top 10 tips to consider when you're thinking about buying a home for your college-age son or daughter near the university and then renting out the rooms to other first-time renters. Okay, tip 1, start with a feasibility check. Use a rental calculator or simple spreadsheet to compare cash flow under different rent scenarios and vacancy rates. Tip 2, test drive the idea with a smaller investment. If affordable, consider a duplex or a property with a separate unit to minimize conflicts and make management easier, and then your son or daughter would have their own lock-off unit without shared accommodations. Just an idea. Tip 3, build a formal plan for repairs and maintenance. 1% rule, meaning 1% of the property value per year on maintenance, is a rough guide, but have a reserve fund beyond that. Let me translate. So if you have, for every $100,000 of value, you want at least $1,000 per year in reserve for maintenance. Now that seems low, but it'll depend on the age of the house. It'll depend on how much wear and tear is going on. And it'll depend on how new your appliances are. But a 1% rule for a reserve fund is not a bad idea. Okay, tip four. Guard against emotional decisions. For those of you who've been listening to the show for a long time, you know I am a fan of awkward conversations. Speak in facts. It's easy to overvalue family convenience. Make sure the financials stand on their own. Tip five, seek local guidance. In this case, Virginia lawyers, CPAs, real estate agents, real estate attorneys, and local university town experience can provide tailored advice, and heck, you might even hire one of them. Tip six, for mom and dad, this may make sense on paper, but is your son or daughter really ready for this type of housing setup? I'll be blunt. Is he grown up enough to handle this? Is he great? If he is, great. And if he isn't, then this idea is likely going to become a nightmare, and especially if you're out of state. Make sure you're being realistic about your son or daughter living with a bunch of first-time renters for the first time together. Now, a side note here. I have seen this work. I have two sets of triplets in my family on Michael's side, two sets of triplets. This is exactly what my family members did. They bought a house in the local area for the triplets to reside in. And actually, I think both cases there was an extra room that they ended up renting out to someone else. So there were four in each time. This happened twice. It's still happening for one set of triplets. And so there is success there, but there is also a level of maturity. You need to make sure that you're doing a gut check, mom and dad, that if you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, that this is actually going to work. Okay. Tip seven, think the entire way through the next few years. These are students. Are they prepared to pay year-round rent? Is there a longer-term trajectory for them? Are they being hard on the house? Make sure you are looking longer than just the first semester. Tip eight, we rent to a lot of first-time renters. Make sure you have a system in place for the way you rent to first-time renters. Tip nine, they aren't going to treat this house the way you would. They just aren't. This is stereotypical tenants, but for first-time renters living on their own for the very first time, they don't know the rules yet. Expect the house to be worn hard, and there will very likely be some kind of renovation after one or all of them move out. Tip 10. Treat this as a business. And I must tell you, in this scenario, you've got first-time renters renting to family, and in this scenario was remotely. You're breaking like every rule in the whole book. And if you're not already a landlord set up for this kind of thing, this could be a nightmare really quick. Treat this as a business. I highly encourage you to either self-manage your, if you can. If this is not even in your local area, then you for sure want to have local help. Hire a local property management company that specifically does student university rentals. Very important. Okay, so there's my top 10 tips. If you're listening and considering a similar path, here are some quick action steps. Step one, have an awkward conversation about your son or daughter about how mature they are in this type of setup. A dorm room or an apartment may be better than you buying a house in another time zone. Make sure you're doing this. Step two, research local rental rates for rooms near your target area around that university. Step three, build a financial model to evaluate cash flow and risk, especially if you've got a big down payment, you've got to leverage something to get into this house. Step four, make sure you have a property manager or some kind of local help to help with all of this. And oh, by the way, one thing we didn't talk about was potential cleaning in the common area, because if you're renting to a bunch of boys, boy clean is laughable. So you might also put in there, add $50 a month for cleaning the common area once a week or something. Just saying, make sure you've got some local help. And step five, start screening and leasing, and then quite frankly, hang on. This is tough. You have to do some soul searching on this one, you guys. You can pay rent for an apartment or a dorm room if you can find it, or you can pay a mortgage on an appreciating asset. But if you're trying to do this remotely, especially if you are not identifying as a landlord, you're not looking at this as a business, be forewarned. This could be hard on you in more ways than one, especially because you're renting to a family member. Make sure you're talking with local professionals. and check if there are HOA limitations of where this house is located. Make sure your plan aligns. Soul searching indeed on this one. Thanks for listening to My Life as a Landlord. I hope you found this insightful. Subscribe for more practical real estate conversations. We're recording this episode today in San Antonio, Texas. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me next week for episode 209, where I start a four-part series talking about the most and least landlord-friendly places in North America. Next week will be the top 5 most frustrating places for a Canadian landlord. I'm Dr. Jen, and I'll see you there.